Because why? We just went through this whole ordeal, right? And honestly, we probably don't even understand the ramifications of what actually happened, because realistically, you think about us and you go out in Lamar's or even Sioux City and you can pretty much do whatever you want, right? You can't do everything, but you go to the coast still, they don't even go out of their houses yet. It's a big deal, right? So obviously they're not making any money. Those businesses have closed probably. So it's still a long ways of getting back to normal. All right? So when we look at this, we're going to look at an index number. This is my single number. Okay, so when I look at all of these numbers in my chart, okay, it's a single number used in the CPI to compare price changes to the base period. Always equal to 100. So if you can think about 100 being your normal, that's what you're going to base off or think of as the starting point. So, an example of this. You're going to look at a year in a certain category. So they're going to tell you what year to look at and what the category is that we're comparing. For example, in 1998, if you look at the food column in 1998, what's the number in the chart? 162.7. Everybody see that in the chart? Okay? So, this means that the cost of food at that time was basically 62.7% of the base period. Over. Okay, so that means that what I was getting dollar for dollar at that time was 62% of what I was getting in 1982 through 1984. That's a lot, right? 62%. It's more than half. So, you know, I put this into the Big 20 hot bottles. Okay? When I was your age, maybe a little younger, those things were maybe 80 cents. How much are they now? $2. If you're lucky, right? So you think about that in 25 years, roughly. I don't want to date myself too much, right? 25, 30 years, 40 years, whatever you want to say. It went up $1.20. That's a lot. Okay? So, if you compare the CPI in 1998 to the one in the base period, okay, when you do this, you're always going back to 1982 through 1984 and starting at 100, except, again, look, except for recreation and then education and communication, because they didn't start those categories until 1997. So if you notice this in your chart, they would have it, their numbers are below 100. Right. But so they started actually comparing it to in 1997. So before 1997, do you see how the numbers in those two categories were less than 100? That meant that you were getting more for your buck. That doesn't happen anymore, right? Okay, so in a sense now, what my number tells me again is I would take the number that they gave was in my category or whatever, which was 162.7, and I'm going to subtract it always from 100. Always think that 100 is my baseline. So 62.7. Another way of saying this, food costs in 1998 would cost $162 for the same thing that it cost $100 in 1982 through 1984. So again, you think about that in less than or approximately 14 years, it went up $62 for whatever we're talking about. That's quite a bit, right? Okay. So why does this happen? This happens because of inflation. What's inflation? Stuff costs more, okay? So who does or what does inflation affect? Banks, okay, prices of everything. So prices of everything, meaning, especially if I'm a business owner, right? Because it affects me probably 2 or 3 ways. Because why? Okay, I got to pay my employees more because they have to meet a certain expectation, right? If Molly's running a business and she's buying stuff from Derek raised his prices because he's a trucker and he's got to get those things to Molly. But he had to raise his prices because gas is out of the world right now. So him raising his prices affects Molly because why? She needs that stuff. So she's got to raise her prices then when she gets it from Derek because that's the only way she can make ends meet. So who is it really affected? It affects me because I go to Molly's grocery store and buy fruit from her. So it's a domino effect, right? And, you know, to nobody's real, I guess, fault, but that's just how it happens. Okay? And so then you got to decide, all right? I've worked with Derek for 45 years. Our 2 companies have. Well, Carter started his own little company, and for whatever reason, he charges 5 cents less. Now, it doesn't sound, 5 cents doesn't sound a lot, but in the bulk that they're doing, 5 cents is probably a lot, right? So is it worth taking a chance on Carter? Because one, you don't know what Carter's business is like. You know that Derek's reliable, and if he has a bad shipment, he takes responsibility for it. If it's late, he does something to get it to you on time. I don't know about Carter yet, right? He has a good reputation in small pieces, but how do I know that he's going to come through for me every single time? Is that 5 cents worth it? Now again, 5 cents doesn't sound a lot, but we're saying 5 cents per whatever, right? So that 5 cents is actually quite a bit. So those are things that you got to think about in it, and those are tough decisions, okay? But the other thing that's tough is Molly's got 4 kids at home and a husband to support. If she closes that grocery store, what do they do? Where do they go? She's got to pay the bills, all right? Tell the husband again.
Good job.
All right, so what we're going to do is try to figure out the rate of inflation between certain years and at certain levels. So the rate of inflation is the percent increase of prices from the previous year. So again, you've got to make sure that you understand what you're looking at. So on page 367, this is kind of what we're going to look at in the rate of inflation section. Okay? Here's where you got to be careful. The year they ask for is the one you're figuring out, and you have to go back 1 year from that. So if they ask you what the inflation rate is for 1998, you go back 1 year. Going back means 1997. All right? So you're going to go back and you're going to subtract the 2 CPIs. All right? Always the all items section if they don't specify what to compare it to. So if they're not going to tell you what category to look at, you're always going to go back and use the all items section. All right? So you're going to subtract those 2, and then you're going to divide that answer by the index of the earlier year. And again, this is really important for the quiz and the test. So you're going to subtract the 2, and then divide by the earlier year. So notice, in this particular example, they took 136.2 minus 130.7. In all of these situations, I don't think you'll ever have a rate of inflation that's negative. If you had a rate of inflation that's negative, that would be good for you or us, the consumer, right? Because that means the prices didn't go up. And then we're going to divide, and you should end up with a percent. So again, remember, because it's a percent, I'm always going to take my answer and divide it by my total from the chart again. So the little number divided by the big number gives me a percent. And realistically, all of these numbers should probably be under 10. You're not going to have a rate of inflation more than that in most cases. Okay, so keep that in mind. If you would get an answer like that, then maybe you just did your math wrong. Okay. So, let's just look at these rate of inflation problems, or these two sections first, and then we'll talk about the purchasing power of the dollar at the end. Okay? So, we're on page 367. And we're still going to use the chart on page 366. So, letter A. Use the CPI table. By what percent did the CPI for apparel increase from the base period to 1994? So, go and look at apparel. And from 1982 to 1994, look at the numbers. And we would have what? So, in this first case right here, when they say what percent did it increase, you just subtract the two and that's your answer. That's it. So how much did apparel increase? 30.5%, right? Okay. What did he say?
He said 12 point something.
Donald, are you looking at apparel?
Yeah.
130.5 minus 100. That's all you gotta do.
How'd you get 12?
Yeah. I don't see 12 to be an answer for anything. Look at medical care from 1982 to 1994. Went up 115.3%. That more than doubled. 2007, right. So from 1984 to 2007, it's gone up basically what? 350%. Or sorry, 250%. But that's only 2007. Now we add another what? Decade and a half, basically, right? So in 1984, what you were paying for medical insurance compared to what you're paying for medical insurance now, it's probably what? Yeah. 6 times the rate. Kind of scary, isn't it? All right, letter B. Refer to the CPI of all the categories whose base period is 1982 through 84. So again, which two aren't?
Recreation and education.
Okay. Which one showed the greatest increase to 2007? We already talked about that. That's all right. What is the percent increase? Again, we just take that number and subtract it from 100.
What would be the other?
I honestly, anything else that doesn't have its own category. Okay, so you could throw a lot of other things in there, but that's all that really means. So instead of having, otherwise they would have to have this chart to be so long that we just did it. All right, let's go down to C. Find the rate of inflation for 1999. So, what am I going to do? So again, it doesn't say anything, so what section do I use? What's that? Was that this one? Or this? Sorry. So we're going to go to all items. And we would have done what? 166.6 minus 163. So again, you could do the inflation rate for basically, when they say all items, they're grouping everything in, and we're trying to just find out what the inflation rate as the country was at that time. But I could also do the inflation rate for medical care, for instance. Okay? So 166.6 minus 163, if you didn't hear Molly, and then what? Divide by 163. Always go to the earlier year. Don't listen to Donald on any of this stuff right now. Okay? So So 3.6 divided by 163, and then do not forget to take your decimal and move it 2 places to the right. Donald, Jeffrey, choke him or something so he doesn't say anything else for a little while. Letter D, find the inflation rate of medical care for 2002. So what are we doing? 291 minus 278. So pretty big one, right? 13 divided by 278 is what? Roughly 4.7%. Now you guys say, well, that probably doesn't say a lot, but 4.7% is quite a bit. I would say for a long time. Inflation's always going to go up.
What did you divide it by?
I'm always going to go by the earlier one. So for this particular case, 2002, I'm going to use the number in 2001.
Divided by that?
I'm dividing by that. So I subtract the 2 numbers in the chart and then divide by the earlier. Okay? All right, turn the page. We're going to figure out the purchasing power of the dollar. What's this mean? Well, this means, yeah, this is basically the inflation. So this is saying, what is that dollar really worth? Okay, so how much does the dollar buy now compared to what it bought in the base period? So again, this goes back to my pop comment, right? I used to be able to get a 20-ounce pop for 80 cents. Now I'm paying $2. Okay? So with the inflation, the dollar buys less than it did in past years. When you do this again, don't forget to make your comparisons to the base period. All right, so it says here, if the dollar was worth 65 cents in 1998 compared to $1 in 1982, you can only get 65 cents of goods that you could have originally. All right, so how do we do this? We're going to divide the CPI of the base period by the CPI you are comparing it to. So in 1993, it was, for this category, was 144.5. We're always going to use 100 because, again, that's where my base is. I'm basing it off of. So I'm going to take 100 divided by the category that they had, and which is, I just do the math, punch it in my calculator. Now, do I really have to multiply by $1? No, if you don't want to. But basically, this is saying that in 1993, whatever the category was, I don't even know what the setting was on. No, I don't know why I got this one. Anyway, so, but we're just going to take the 100 and divide it by the number in the chart. So, on page 369, letter E. Find the purchasing power of the dollar in 2007. All right, so in 2007, we would go back to our chart, and we're going to use what? 100, again, divided by what? 207.3. And if we punch that into our calculator, we get what? $0.48, right? So basically, they're saying in 2007 compared to 1984, you can only get less than 50%, or sorry, 50 cents of the stuff that you got in 1984. It's kind of depressing, huh? Letter F, basically the same thing. Okay, so in 1997, oh, maybe that's the one we got. In 1997, you would have got 62 cents for that one, for the dollar. And then the last thing that they talk about in this section is the unemployment rate. So this is probably one of the bigger things that politically we went through the discussions in this last election, right? Because if you liked or disliked President Trump, the unemployment rate was phenomenal when he was in office, right? We had jobs, okay? So that's gonna be one of the major things that we're looking at. Obviously, the unemployment rate, again, it all depends on where you're at, what the socioeconomic status that you're talking about. Socioeconomic is what we're talking about in the categories in the little green chart there, okay? Obviously, the biggest category, as you can see here, was teens, but that might be just because, you know, there's a lot of different reasons for that teen category to be high, okay? Do they take into consideration tip when she's, you know, in a sport, but she's not working at that time? You know, or if you're in speech and you can't work for 3 consecutive Saturdays, are you technically unemployed? Maybe, maybe not, you know what I mean? So there's ways to manipulate those numbers, but in this, these are pretty simple. You're just looking at the chart and using it. So in letter G it says, refer to the table above to find the workers with the lowest unemployment rate. Who would you say? Women, right? That's a good sign. H, what was the difference in the unemployment rate of male and female workers in the data shown? So they're just using that chart and asking you simple questions about it. All right? So tomorrow, you'll do both of those assignments in class. All right? Just give it to you on this. I'll have it written up on the board in the little spot. If they don't fit just on Tuesday, it might go back into Monday, but you'll know that you have to do both of them. Okay? Have a good rest of the day.